A few days later, a call finally came with news. One of the attackers had started talking, and investigators had identified the person behind it all. The name shocked Callum. It was a man from Evangeline's own family, her cousin, once her business partner. Years earlier, she had bought him out fairly. His bad decisions afterward had cost him everything. What followed was fueled by bitterness, greed, and revenge. The kidnapping had been planned carefully, meant to humiliate her and extract millions. That evening, Evangeline arrived at the cottage looking drained and hollow. She spoke quietly, almost to herself. He had been at her birthday celebration. He had comforted her at her father's funeral. She admitted that knowing he had threatened a child with HOA was something she would never forgive. Callum shared that feeling. They sat together as the sun faded, saying little. Finally, she explained that plans were already in motion. He would be arrested publicly, at a major company gathering. If he wanted to ruin her in front of everyone, he would face justice the same way. The meeting was packed. Executives, investors, and media filled the room. Evangeline stood calmly and addressed the crowd. She spoke openly about what had happened and revealed the truth behind the attack. Images and footage appeared, showing the attempt, the chaos, and the man who stopped it. Gasps spread as she named her cousin as the mastermind. He tried to deny it, rising from his seat, but the evidence spoke louder. A recording played his own words admitting desperation and intent. Law enforcement moved in as cameras flashed, placing him in handcuffs while the room watched in stunned silence. Evangeline's voice remained steady as she spoke of justice, not revenge. As the man was led away, one of the agents leaned toward Callum and made a quiet comment about how far he'd come. Callum answered simply. The agent added one last thing, that Callum's father had raised a good man. Months later, the Grand Hotel was filled with light and music for the Foundation's gala. Callum stood near the entrance in a tailored suit that still felt strange on him. Theo stood beside him, restless in his small formal outfit, already asking about cake. Callum assured him it would be worth the wait. Across the room, familiar faces offered smiles and subtle gestures of support. Evangeline stepped onto the stage and addressed the crowd, speaking about the stranger who had stepped forward without knowing who she was, without expecting anything in return. She spoke about courage, character, and the quiet power of choosing to do what's right. She explained that he never expected praise or payment. He simply saw someone in danger and chose to move toward it instead of turning away. Her gaze settled on Callum, steady and full of meaning. That choice, she said, showed her what true courage really looks like. That night wasn't just about honoring one man, it was about recognizing what he stood for. Proof that ordinary people, when tested, can rise to extraordinary moments. Later, away from the noise of the celebration, Callum sat alone in the hotel's quiet library. Evangeline joined him, and for a moment, both spoke at once, then laughed at the awkward timing. Callum admitted he had been struggling to understand what they were becoming. She was his employer, someone from a world so different from his own, and he worried he might be reading things wrong. Evangeline reassured him gently. He wasn't mistaken, but one thing mattered above everything else. Theo would always come first. Callum agreed without hesitation, and she smiled, saying she wouldn't want it any other way. Before the moment could grow heavier, the library doors flew open. Theo stood there, flushed with excitement, announcing that there was cake waiting. Then, with a child's blood honesty, he asked if they were going to kiss already because the silence was getting strange. Evangeline laughed freely. Sometimes, she said, kids speak the truth better than anyone. She cupped Callum's face and kissed him, soft, confident, real. Theo covered his eyes but peeked through his fingers. Grinning, he asked if that meant she was joining their family. Evangeline looked to Callum, but Theo didn't wait for an answer. He decided for everyone. She made his dad happy, and she let him feed ducks. To him, that was more than enough. Evangeline's laughter mixed with tears as she accepted the verdict. Time passed, and they returned to the same Grand Hotel where everything had once begun. The evening was calm and clear, the air filled with stars instead of rain. Theo could barely contain himself, bouncing with anticipation. Evangeline stepped forward in a simple white dress, while Mrs. Peden watched nearby, already emotional. Callum started to speak, but before he could kneel, Theo proudly produced a small box. He explained that he helped choose the ring. It had 3 stones, as one for Evangeline, one for his dad, and one for himself because they were a team. Evangeline said yes without hesitation, emotion catching in her voice. Mrs. Peden pulled them all into a tight embrace, declaring she had known this moment was coming from the very beginning. Age, she reminded them, comes with wisdom. Later, as they walked together under the night sky, Theo asked if his grandfather could see them. Callum believed he could and that he would be proud. Evangeline squeezed Callum's hand and reflected on that night long ago. He had every reason to look away, every excuse to stay safe, but he didn't. Out of fear and chaos, a family had been formed. None of it would have happened if he had chosen differently. Callum thought of his son, of the woman who would soon be his wife, of his father's words that had guided him all along. For years, he had believed he fell short in no money, no status, no success. But that wasn't what his father meant at all. It was never about wealth. It was about showing up, about being there when it truly mattered. Theo interrupted the moment with a yawn, announcing that the speech was touching, but he was tired and hungry. Evangeline laughed, saying some things never change. Callum smiled and replied that some things do, and sometimes, the changes are better than anything you could have dreamed. They walked forward together. A former security guard who became a hero, a CEO who rediscovered what truly matters, and a young boy wise enough to see how the pieces fit long before anyone else did. Behind them, the city shimmered. Ahead of them, a future built on courage, love, and the simple act of choosing to do the right thing. Callum Thorne had spent much of his life believing he wasn't enough, but one rainy night taught him otherwise. Worth was never measured by numbers in a bank account. It was measured by showing up, by choosing bravery over fear, by running toward danger when it would be easier to turn away. In saving someone else, he had finally found himself and learned that sometimes, the bravest act of all is believing you deserve the happiness that follows. Callum Thorne had just $43 and some loose change in his bank account, a 7-year-old son who truly believed his dad was a real-life superhero, and a single moment to decide whether saving a stranger was worth risking everything he had. In reality, there was never a choice to make. That night, rain poured down relentlessly, the kind that soaked through clothes and turned city streets into glowing mirrors of neon light. Callum stood under the narrow shelter of a parking structure, watching the storm roll in from the lake as the cold crept through his worn security uniform. The fabric was frayed at the elbows, the name badge scratched and faded after years of unnoticed labor. He had been on his feet for hours, bootseeking a boots he couldn't afford to replace yet. Somewhere across the city, his son Theo slept on a neighbor's couch, wrapped in comfort and innocence, clutching his favorite book. A message arrived on Callum's phone, a photo showing Theo fast asleep, peaceful and safe. Love and guilt tightened his chest at the same time. Love because that boy was his entire world. Guilt because Callum wasn't there to tuck him in, choosing instead to work late into the night just to survive. Years earlier, Theo's mother had walked away, deciding that family life wasn't for her. Papers arrived. Support never did. Since then, Callum's days had been a blur of labor and responsibility, a construction work at dawn, precious hours with his son in the evening, and then another shift through the night. He remembered his father's words, lessons that never faded: a man isn't measured by what he owns, but by how he acts when someone needs help. His father had worked himself into an early grave, and Callum had promised he wouldn't repeat that path, yet here he was, doing exactly that. Across the street stood a luxury hotel, shining and untouched by hardship. Wealth and comfort glowed behind glass walls, a world that felt unreachable. That was when something caught Callum's attention. A dark SUV sped toward the entrance, stopping abruptly. The engine stayed running. The windows were tinted. Instinct told him something was wrong. Moments later, a woman stepped outside, confident, elegant, her red coat striking against the gray night. Then chaos erupted. Masked men rushed from the vehicle and grabbed her before anyone could react. Her cry cut through the rain, sharp with fear. Callum's mind screamed warnings, so he was unarmed. He had a child depending on him, but another voice was louder. He ran. Rain slammed into his face as he crashed into the first attacker, sending them both to the ground. The woman fought back, managing to break free, but the danger wasn't over. A blade flashed. Pain tore through Callum's arm as blood mixed with rain, yet he didn't back away. He pushed forward, disarming one attacker and slamming him into the vehicle. The second came fast, and they struggled on the slick pavement until the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. The attackers fled, tires screaming as the SUV vanished into the night. Silence followed, broken only by rain and distant sirens. Callum stood shaking, injured but standing. The woman collapsed against the wall, and he caught her before she fell, assuring her she was safe. Soon, flashing lights and voices filled the street. She was taken away in an ambulance, looking back at him with gratitude before the doors closed. As paramedics treated his wound, one of them asked if he knew who she was. Callum didn't. The name that followed stunned him: a billionaire CEO, one of the most powerful women in the world. Callum looked down at his torn uniform and thought about the money in his account. Two completely different worlds had collided in a single moment. By the end of the night, his face was everywhere: news channels, headlines, social media. Messages flooded his phone. Among them was a single text from an unknown number, cold and threatening, reminding him that stepping in had consequences. The message echoed in Callum's mind that he should have stayed out of it. But that warning didn't matter anymore. By the time morning arrived, exhaustion barely had time to fade. Callum found Theo sitting at the kitchen table in dinosaur pajamas, eyes fixed on the television. The news was replaying the story again. Theo looked up, amazed. "Dad, that's you. They're calling you a hero." Callum smiled softly and brushed it off. He told him he had simply helped someone who needed it. Theo studied him carefully, serious in a way only children can be. He repeated something his grandfather once said: "Heroes aren't fearless people, they're people who feel afraid but still choose to help." Callum admitted the truth. Yes, he had been scared. Theo nodded as if solving a simple equation. Then that meant his dad was a hero. Later, Callum stepped into the private wing of the hospital, a place so polished and quiet it felt unreal. Thick carpets softened every step, and expensive artwork lined the walls. He felt completely out of place in his old clothes. Evangeline Prescott sat near the window, dressed in a silk robe, a small bandage visible on her temple. She stood to greet him, thanking him for coming and asking how he was feeling. Callum answered honestly, saying he felt better than he deserved to. They sat facing each other as she studied him closely. She spoke about what he had done, how he ran toward danger, placed himself between her and armed men, and was injured because of it. Her eyes rested on the bandage on his arm. Callum explained simply that he had a 7-year-old son, and in that moment, he imagined what it would feel like if someone tried to take him. He did what he hoped someone else would do for his child. Her expression softened. She asked Theo's name and whether he understood what had happened. Callum said Theo was still too young to know how frightening the world could be. Evangeline turned toward the window and spoke about her own life via growing up in the city, building her company after losing her father, working endless hours, believing she was untouchable. That belief had shattered in a single night. She admitted she had looked into Callum's life and listed the struggles he carried: raising a child alone, working 2 jobs, overdue bills, medical debt from his son's illness. Callum felt a flash of anger and said she had no right to dig into his personal life. She agreed, but explained that she needed to understand the man who had saved her. Then she made an offer: not charity, and not another security job. She was creating a public safety foundation focused on protecting communities and training people who actually understood fear and responsibility. She wanted Callum to lead it. He questioned why she would choose him, someone with no management background. Her answer was simply skills could be taught, but character could not. She handed him a folder outlining the salary, benefits, and health coverage for both him and Theo. It was more money than he had ever imagined earning. She told him this wasn't pitcha, it was respect. Callum thought about his son, and about his father, who had worked himself to death. He accepted. The early days were overwhelming. The company headquarters towered over the city, all glass and steel. His office overlooked streets he once patrolled on foot. Some people doubted him, questioning why he was there. At his first meeting, Callum spoke honestly. He talked about neighborhoods where parents were afraid to let their children play outside. He didn't ask for trust, only the chance to earn it. Slowly, attitudes changed. Coffee meetings with Evangeline became routine. Professional distance turned into quiet friendship. She spoke about loneliness at the top, and he shared his fear of not being enough. One evening, She came to his apartment to review grant applications. Theo watched her carefully from the doorway before asking if she was his dad's boss. She admitted she was. Theo told her that his dad smiled more now, that he used to look tired all the time but now looked hopeful. Evangeline glanced at Callum, something warm and unspoken in her eyes. Theo continued, repeating another piece of wisdom from his grandfather. Some people, he said, are like puzzle pieces or broken on their own, but complete when they find the right match. He looked at both of them and suggested they might be each other's missing piece. For a moment, neither adult could find the words to respond, and the room fell into a quiet that felt full of meaning. Everything shattered again when Callum least expected it. Theo was already asleep, and Callum sat quietly reviewing work proposals, trying to focus, when his phone vibrated. The number was unfamiliar. A photo filled the screen. Theo was walking out of school, backpack bouncing, completely unaware he was being watched. The message beneath it was cold and precise. They knew where he lived. They knew where his son went to school. And they warned him to stay away from things that didn't concern him. The air seemed to leave Callum's lungs as fear froze his blood. Within a short time, Callum and a half-awake Theo were riding in the back of a dark SUV, leaving the city behind for a secure location. Theo rubbed his eyes and asked what was happening. Callum forced a calm smile and told him they were going on a small adventure, staying at Miss Prescott's house with a big yard, maybe even ducks. Theo latched onto that idea, repeating the word with a sleepy grin. Back at the apartment building, Mrs. Peden grabbed the arm of the security officer helping them and warned him to protect her boys like his own. The promise was given without hesitation. In the quiet of the moving car, Theo asked a question that broke Callum's heart. He wondered if bad people were coming after them because his dad helped that woman. Callum didn't lie. He said he thought that might be true. Theo asked if he wished he hadn't helped her. Callum paused before answering, choosing his words carefully. No, he said, because helping people was who he was, and who he wanted Theo to grow up to be. Even when it was scary. Theo nodded slowly, accepting it, and said he was glad his dad helped her too.